All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Anyone who comes in late, we'll just let them find their feet as they come on in. We are Do Big Things. We are a women-owned and women-led digital agency with a staff that is 50% people of color. And we partner with progressive candidates, campaigns, causes, and companies that are working to create powerful and lasting change. And this is a year where that's never been more important. I think most folks will agree with that. And so we're aware that many of you are probably interested in running campaigns, and one person has even said she's interested in running for office. So we want to help you learn how to launch campaigns that pop on day one. We will introduce ourselves now. My name is Janani Srinivasan. I'm a content director at Do Big Things. I write words and I help strategize as well. And apparently back in the 8th grade, I was very good at spelling. I'll pass it to my colleague, Avery Lord.
Hi, my name is Avery Lord. I'm Director of Digital Technology. I run a team that mostly works on the back end of things, so doing production on email and ads and social. I have 2 dogs in the room with me, so forgive me if they are loud. I can't control that. And I will pass it over to Ryan Brown.
Awesome. Hi, guys. My name is Ryan Brown. I am the Senior Vice President for Digital Advertising here at Do Big Things. And my fun fact is that I have somewhat of a reputation being the cruise ship karaoke queen. Yeah, I'll just leave it there. You can ask me later if you want to hear the stories. That's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about launching campaigns. So we'll keep it moving.
All right. So to add some context, for many campaigns, launch day is the single biggest day and chance that you have to prove yourself and put yourself on the map in a very crowded media landscape. It can be a challenge, but as you can see when Joe Biden rolled out his VP announcement, it can be done. It can be done extremely well without leaks or pitfalls, and it isn't magic. There are steps that you can take to make it go well. Ourselves, we've launched campaigns up and down the ballot, including House, Senate, and a couple presidential campaigns. We've done it successfully, and while doing it, we also encountered a few kind of circumstantial speed bumps that you may as well, but we wanted to collect our wisdom and help you learn from it. We will have a couple handouts at the end of this presentation, and our information is on these slides, so if you'd like to reach out to any of us for more advice, please feel free to do so. Next slide.
Awesome. So I will walk you through just how we're going to organize the presentation. We'll start with some top priorities to think about as the number one thing to start with. Then we'll talk through timelines, and we've split it out into 2 weeks out, the final stretch, and then launch day and beyond. We'll also have a section at the end where we talk about some mistakes, like Johnny mentioned, which we call selected snafus, and then we'll leave some time at the end for Q&A. All right, so to pull off a successful launch, there is a lot that needs to happen, but a lot of it is not content related, a lot of it is infrastructure related. So I'll pass it over to Ryan to start talking about that.
Yeah, so like Avery said, a lot of what we're actually talking about here today is a lot of things, all the nitty-gritty things that you need to keep in mind as you're thinking about what it takes to pull off a successful campaign. Basically, what we're going to walk through you in a very broad way is like a checklist. It's going to be really substantive and probably feel like a lot, but trust me, you can do it, and I swear it will really help make your campaigns pop. The reason why we always think about and want to stress all the little details before is just because when you get to launch day, and you'll hear us say this again, is that it should be eerily calm. If you've done it right and if you've done it correctly, like your launch day should be fairly smooth, and it really can help you kind of open up your mind so that you can achieve it and think about what your actual goals are. And then just, you know, one thing that we always like to say is just like all the little things, all those nitty-gritty things, all of those things that you kind of like think in the back of your mind, those are things that you should bring to the table when you're in your planning mode, because those are the things that really help make your campaign shine. It's all of those little details. And I'll pass it over to Johnny.
Yeah, Johnny here. We'd also like to emphasize not every single thing you'll see in this presentation is applicable to every single campaign. We're offering all the possible ingredients that you might need. Some of them, like having a functioning website, are pretty much universally needed. Others may not be needed by you in particular if you're running for, city council, or if you're launching a particular kind of campaign. But we wanted to really cover everything that you might see at every level, because we've experienced so many different kinds of launches. Next slide. All right. We wanted to get into some of what we call, just the primary building blocks of campaigns. And I will let Ryan kick this section off.
Yeah. So I think behind every successful campaign, launch, anything is that is clearly defined goals. We say that, we're here to talk about all the nitty-gritty details that we want to get you guys through, but all of that really needs to roll up to what your clearly defined goals are. What is it that you are trying to achieve with your launch and your campaign? What does success look like? We always say that you should have a North Star that everyone on your team is on board with. So no matter all the decisions no matter what the decision is and all the decisions that you guys need to make, we all understand exactly what we're trying to do. And we're going to do what we need to do to make sure that we get there in that right way. So whether you are trying to grow your social following or grow your email list, or if you're trying to hit a certain fundraising goal, or whether or not you're just trying to raise awareness for your issue or your candidate, we want to make sure that you put the infrastructure in place. Also, we'll get into this a little bit later, your strategies and priorities, so that you all roll up to a clearly defined goal or clearly defined goals to make sure that you can have a really successful campaign.
All right. So to get there, we really want to encourage you to think of building a launch operation as sort of building a structure with building blocks. You can think about, you can extend the metaphor as far as you want: foundation, scaffolding, plumbing, electricity. The key is you're creating a really large interconnected structure. It's very dependent on each individual part working properly. If any one of them fritzes, your whole structure falls down. And we really want to emphasize this, especially because the decision to embark on a campaign can be a very emotional and very exhilarating one. People may have a cause or a vision that they really, really feel strongly about. But in order to execute that vision, you need to have these building blocks in place, or your campaign will not succeed. I'll pass it to Ryan to talk about some of these building blocks.
Yeah, the most important thing that we always want to emphasize, and we'll get to this in the next slide, is talking about your launch timeline. Ideally, if you don't have your launch date identified, as far out as possible, that's something that you want to make sure that you have as an active conversation. Because ideally, what you want to do is be building your timeline backwards. When you're able to build your timeline backwards, you can, really learn and understand and figure out how to prioritize and deprioritize things that need to get done and when they need to get done. We'll walk through this more, but there are a lot of moving pieces that are all very interconnected, that kind of it's like putting a puzzle together. Like everything has its own little place, and you need to make sure that it needs to be there at the right time.
Exactly. Thanks, Ryan. Johnny here again. One of the pieces that's just essential, integral, especially right now, is making sure your campaign website is on track to be constructed and quality checked and functioning by the time of your launch. It seems very obvious, but to multiple teams that we have worked with, it has not been obvious that this needs to be in place. And the website is really like, we call it the giant squid that touches every single part of your digital operation. If it's not functional, you cannot run your ads, you can't send your emails, you can't collect money. No website, no go. Seems obvious, but it isn't always as obvious as it should be. Another building block, again, may seem obvious, but still matters, is really inventorying the content that you need for your launch. You may feel like you just have a list of, oh yeah, I need to write an email, get a video together, get some tweets together, get some ads together. But really the steps that it takes to create, approve, and launch and publicize those elements are a lot more than you think they are. They don't come out of thin air. So in addition to creating those, you want to make sure you have the infrastructure and processes to make sure all of those actually get online and get in front of people. And I'll talk to Avery about Avery will talk about some other factors in that.
Yeah, and another thing we added to our list of building blocks is approval times and restrictions. You need to know what's possible and what's not based on the infrastructure and the platforms that you want to use. I work on the ads team with Ryan, and anybody that works in ads knows that platforms like Facebook and Google are constantly changing their requirements. If you can even advertise on their platform, what the specs are, how long verifications take, all that kind of stuff. So getting ahead on knowing what's even possible and how to get there is super important.
Yeah. Speaking of building blocks, we put together what a sample timeline looks like. And I see we had a question from Stephanie, so we're actually answering this live. Our recommendation is that you should have at least 2 weeks to be thinking about a launch. And this is because there are a lot of things that take time, such as building out a website. A bare bones website takes at least 2 weeks to put together. And if you don't have that, then you really put yourself at risk for not finishing all of the steps. And then, again, need to prioritize and think about what happens there. With this, just to kind of explain this a little bit more, is one, we say at least 2 weeks, and that is really kind of to be able to walk through some building blocks, or all the building blocks that we just mentioned. There's a little bit of period, a couple of days before launch, we call the final stretch, and that's the place where you're really sort of just, tightening all the screws and checklisting and making sure that everything is good to go. And again, as we mentioned at the top, we talk about day of being sort of this eerily calm day because you've done everything and everything's in order, so you can really kind of focus on what the goals are in responding to anything that day. And then after that is post-launch, your actual campaign that's going to be sustained for a long time. What does that look like? And that's something that we, some of those building blocks go into your launch and what really helps set you up for success at the end. Now, the one thing I want to major caveat I want to put here is that, like, we understand that, decisions are happening and changing all the time. So your situation may differ. Not everyone has the luxury of having 2 weeks to launch a campaign. We've certainly been in that situation. We're saying this is the ideal timeline to have when we're thinking about a launch, and so that we can, again, build backwards from there. All right, let's get into the nitty gritty.
All right, so we're starting with 2 weeks out. I'm going to talk about some of the setup and infrastructure related stuff that you'll need to be thinking about within this 2 weeks out span. So your website, like Johnny said, is probably one of the most important parts of a launch. That should definitely be under construction in this span. Tech tools are chosen, so things like your mailer, your fundraising platform like ActBlue, other platforms that you want to use at launch should be identified, chosen. Ideally, contract negotiations are underway, as those can take some time, and access to those platforms are super important to get a lot of the other stuff done. Along that line, integration, so making sure that your mailer is integrated with your fundraising platform before launch. That's super important to identify in this period. And then start making and filling out templates. I would talk about templates all day if I could. If you go to the next slide, Ryan, that's just a screenshot of, you get a screenshot of the top of an ActBlue template that my team put together. It's easy to think that there are just a few pieces of copy that you need and you're good to go. But this template, just for a simple ActBlue form, has, I think, between 30 and 40 different little pieces that we need. Mm-hmm. So it's thinking about autoresponders and metadata and recurring asks and form fields and which ones are required, which ones are not. So all those little things are things that you can start thinking about even before you have copy, that'll save you time in the back end. And that's something that's super important right now, especially when you're likely to not be launching a campaign sitting next to other people on your team. Making templates will really decrease the back and forth between writers and approvers and production folks. So if you take one thing from me today, it's to create templates early and use them. I'll pass it over to Johnny to talk about email.
Yes, Johnny here. If that's one thing that you take from Avery's templates, one thing you take from me is get started early. On the email side, she already mentioned the mailer, but you're also going to want to think about who you are going to be emailing, who is on your email list, how long has it been since they received email from you? Is your list called cold or warm? We have worked on campaigns where if we had launched without warming up the list, so to speak, sending them a few unrelated emails and other topics, many of our launch emails would probably have gone to spam. So think about who you're emailing, how long it's been since you talked to them, and general list hygiene, as it's called, making sure that you're cleared of dead addresses, out-of-date email addresses and whatnot. You're also going to want to have your email template underway. That is the coded piece of meeting of the designer and developer that actually enables you to get an email out the door. It's your email in code form, so you want that underway. Don't want to put that off. Finally, you want to begin calendaring the emails that you're going to send on launch date and beyond, because you don't want to be deciding in the moment, what the calendar for that week is going to look like. It's going to be very busy. You're going to have a lot of needs flying at you. And finally, the launch email in particular, I have written launch emails that took 2 weeks to approve, with 10 to 15 people looking at them, revising them. So just think ahead about the approval times you're going to need and how many people are going to need to look at these important communications. You don't want to put it off to the last minute. Next slide.
All right, this is Ryan here. The last piece here, if there's one thing you want to take away from ads, actually, if there's 2 things you want to take from ads, is 1, make sure you have really clearly defined goals for your ads. You want to make sure that you get the most bang for your buck and that you set your campaigns up that way. Second is what's highlighted here down in yellow is like, do not build your ads the night before. We'll get into a little bit more detail about why that's super important, but if you do not want to be in a situation where you're building your ads the night before. So those are the 2 major takeaways if you want to from ads. But let's just kind of talk through the other things. Is 1, identifying strategies. Like after you understand what your goals are based on what your budget is, like what are the strategies you're going to do that? What are the platforms that you're going to be using to do that? And making sure that those platforms are helping to have the tools necessary to help you align to make sure that you're reaching your goals. The 4th bullet here is talking about major creative assets. This is really thinking about what does your launch video look like? Is that something that you want to do, want to incorporate into your ads plan? And the beauty with the launch videos, those tend to be a little bit longer. What's beautiful for ads is that you can do cut downs that are made more for ads on platforms. So you can do a 6-second, 15-second, 30 seconds. It doesn't necessarily need to run the 2.5 minute ad that the launch video is intended to be, or you can. And then the last thing here, which is really important, is you need to initiate, if you're using self-serve platforms such as Facebook and Google, you'll want to start that conversation around verification and also account setup processes if necessary. The reason why we want to start those processes now is because you need to usually give them a bunch of information that you have to typically get from someone in the campaign or a lawyer to help even just make sure that you guys get verified in time to be able to run ads. Second piece is that if you guys have been doing this for a while, then you know that at least on Facebook, the process for funding your accounts has been changing a lot all the time. So you want to make sure that you have access to a credit card or you have a line of credit set up with a platform that usually takes a couple of days because that works on bank days, not campaign days, to set up. So make sure you want to have those conversations early and then be able to work backwards from there. All right, next.
All right, Janani here. And this one seems obvious, but one of the worst sentences to hear in an organization is, who has the photo of that thing we photographed that one time in that one place? That's not very far off from some of the requests I've heard. Do yourself a favor and far beyond your launch, figure out a good way to organize and index and name all of your graphic assets. Have your logos, your branding, your style guide all easily accessible for everyone in the organization. Because especially the logo, which touches everything from email to ads to whatnot. Know how to find and name every piece of visual content that you have. I've also broken out one warning about web fonts. Web fonts are something that actually stole hours of my own life during a launch when I realized that the fonts used on different pages required different licenses. So speak to your designer about what can be used where, and just involve all members of your team in detailed conversations on things as boring as web fonts, because it really counts, and it can trip you up at the end of the day. Next slide. Social media needs are some of the most underestimated on campaigns. They seem simple, but it can actually be a lot more work than you imagine. But if you plan well, it'll go well. If you're setting up brand new accounts, you're going to want to think about what handles you want. We recommend keeping them standardized across Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You might want to obtain some placeholder or decoy accounts so that people don't know what you're up to, but that they don't steal the names that you had in mind. We also recommend forming a relationship with Facebook, Twitter, because they can help shut down rival accounts or people who have scooped up your name and aren't letting you use it. They tend to be kind to people who actually want to do good things with their platforms. So you're going to want to start thinking about that early. If your accounts already exist and you're just transitioning them, begin planning to transition them now. We've worked on campaigns where there were some really serious legal hurdles to changing, for example, an official account into a campaign account. and so on and so forth. So you don't want to get stuck the night before realizing that you have these hurdles. Start researching them now. Finalize your social posting tools. Start creating copy templates for everything you need, the Twitter bios, the about statement, the mission statement. Again, you don't want to be deciding this at 5 o'clock in the morning on launch day. Get it all approved beforehand. Finally, on launch day, particularly if you're launching brand new accounts, you don't want them to have 0 followers. You want to have a plan to get people liking and engaging with them on day 1. So think about toolkits for your followers, a tweet or a post or guidance that you can give them to get going on day 1.
Great.
Next slide.
All right, so we just kind of went through what you should start thinking about with 2 weeks out. This is kind of a recap of where you should be at the end of those 2 weeks, heading into the final stretch. So on the infrastructure side, your website should be under construction, ideally almost done. You have access to a mailer and other platforms, and your templates are created and are being populated with copy. And on the ad side,
your goals are identified, and as we get closer to the 2 weeks, you really want to have a media plan that is almost but finalized at this point. Understanding that things change, but one thing that should definitely be finalized is your budget. You want to know exactly what you're working with, because that'll help you decide what is and is not going to be a priority with your ads budget. And then lastly, verification and account setup. We said this, I said this already, but as you get to the end of your 2 weeks, this should be well underway. You should have made a lot of progress on this by now, because as we get closer, it really gets harder with those platform approval times, and you just want to make sure you steer clear of any of those hurdles that could really not go well for your launch. And on email, Johnny?
On email, just to recap what we said above, get your templates prepped, get your launch emails drafted, know who your email list is, whether they need to be warmed up, get your graphic assets organized, get your fonts, and then on social, reserve your social handles, including various and misspelled versions of them, to cover all of your bases. Get your account copy and drafting, and know what your transition plan is so that you don't run into problems on the morning of.
Great. All right, we're getting into the final stretch. I probably should stop here. All right, so you guys are well underway to your launch. Things are happening here, and it is time for the final stretch. At this point in the final stretch, kind of what we just gone through with the recap is that you should have made a lot of progress. Things are really at this point more about like tightening the screws, checking for any last minute things, and just kind of like being aware on each of a couple of different buckets of what needs to happen. So as we talk about ads in particular, you want to make sure that you have money in accounts. And this is for in a couple of different ways. If you're a political campaign and you want to work with a vendor that's not a self-serve platform like Facebook or Google or Snapchat or Twitter, even though you can't run on Twitter, I know. Outside vendors typically require that political advertisers pay upfront. So you want to make sure that that is something that you are taking care of. If you are working with a self-serve platform, you want to make sure that you either have access to the credit card, like we've mentioned, or you have that line of credit set up and you have funded that account. So that will not be something that will prevent you on launch day. And then the second thing here is talking about creative assets. We want to make sure that we are well on the way in thinking about production. There are a number of things that, elements that we need to pull in. We talked about the website, so we'll need landing pages here. We need to make sure that we have all the right sizes for video. We need to make sure that copy and all of that is approved as well. And I'll let Avery take it away for the rest of the things that should be done.
Yeah, so on the ad side, like I said, I work in the production side of things, and I think there is a misconception that when you turn on an ad, everybody automatically sees it. And that is just not the case. But it can be the case if you prepare. So we really suggest building your ads 2 days before so that they can go through all of the necessary approvals on the platform. And so when you do turn it on launch morning, everybody sees them. That's definitely not always been the case for us, but it's definitely something that we suggest. And to do that, you'll need all your copy finalized. You'll need the URL for if you're asking people to join your email list. And like Ryan said, you'll need all of the creative in the exact specs and sizes and lengths that your social ad or any of your ads require. Passing it over to Johnny to talk to us about email.
Great, yes. A lot of this I've said before, but it bears repeating. You know, in the final stretch, your launch email should be well underway in drafting and revision. Lock the text early and don't let your team edit it up until the last minute, until 11 p.m. the night before. 11 p.m. the night before is when you should be checklisting and testing it to make sure that it's accurate, not rewriting it. You want your launch video in place. Frequently launch emails link to launch videos. You're going to want to make sure that's completed and hosted on YouTube so that you can link to it in your email and check it out. You're also going to be wanting to think about the rest of the week. What do people experience once they join your email list? Are they going to get calls to action, calls to volunteer or fundraise? Don't let them just sit there doing nothing. Launch is a great moment to galvanize people, and you want to make sure you catch them and then get them doing something right away. Finally, think about your goals for the entire week, your fundraising and organizing and promotional goals, and calendar for them, and start drafting for them as well. Your launch day is going to leave you pretty tired, so you don't want to be stuck drafting on that day. Think ahead. On the social side, in the last few days, you should be well underway creating your assets, as well as transitional assets if you want to hide what you're up to, whether it's just a blue sky or something else. You want all of this to be underway and not still outstanding. And you also want to be drafting your miscellaneous copy for all of your accounts. I can't emphasize again how important it is to make sure you've got the correct sizing and formatting and timing for these assets, because on social, you can't test them beforehand. Launch morning is going to be the first day that you upload them, and you don't want to find out that your video is 3 seconds too long, and you don't want to find out, as I did at 3 o'clock in the morning, that a YouTube cover photo is the wrong dimensions. I suffered so that you don't have to. Don't suffer.
Thanks, Janani.
And then, Ryan will just take us through where you need to be at the night before.
Yeah. So night before, the most important thing I can tell you about the night before is that, well, one, you need to pat yourself on the back because you have done a lot of work to prepare for this moment. Second, are the things that you see here on the slide. A detailed TikTok of who does what in what order. You cannot stress enough that having a very thorough understanding that everyone is on board with and everyone understands about the rollout of the launch is super, super, super important. All of those details that you've been working out, you want to make sure you have a go person to make sure that to be able to address any issues that may come up. So having a detailed TikTok for what happens is really important. Second, the night before, things are checklisted, 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 checklisted. If nothing else you're doing the night before, you are making a TikTok and you are checklisting across all of your digital assets, and they're ready to go live. And then the last thing here is what we started doing here is like rapid response scenarios gamed out. You want to think about like, all right, we're set up to do this one thing, but if something else happens, what will our response be? So just making sure you're having those conversations about like what will happen in those rapid response moments. Mm-hmm. And then just, some things that we've just learned along the way, as Janani has alluded to a couple of times, that you just put on a pot of coffee. You'll probably be up late, kind of just going through all of those details in your mind about what needs to happen, and you should, to just make sure that everything goes off without a hitch.
Great.
All right.
All right. It's launch day. You are going to want to set some alarms, both mechanical and human. Avery has been my alarm. She called me at 5 o'clock in the morning one day to remind me to tweet, and I appreciated it. So, make sure, put your pot of coffee on and make sure you're up when you got to be up. There's no getting around it. You're going to want to go live, and you're going to want to do it in a certain order. We've put a sample TikTok in the next slide, but generally the sequence is website, social platforms, press, email, and ads. And that's because of the various dependencies. Certain things need to be live before others. Be flexible with content. Depending how the day goes, you may need to pivot. And, we had a client who was attacked just half an hour after she launched her campaign, and we ran with that, for the rest of the day. So, be ready for whatever comes. The more that you've planned, the more you'll be able to roll with the punches and, just respond to whatever's happening. And finally, reporting. You're going to want to know what's happening, the money that's coming in, the supporters that are coming in. So have something in place to report out early and often during the day. As Ryan said, if you do it right, launch day can be eerily calm. And that's because you did all the work beforehand. Next slide. Here's the sample TikTok. Again, this is actually a real TikTok that one of our clients used. And this is the sequence of events. Again, website, social, press, circulating social internally to followers so that they could like and hype things up, launch email, and social media posts later in the morning. And I'll pass it to Ryan to think beyond launch day.
All right, so now that we've gotten through launch, congratulations, it was a success, everything is awesome. What do you want to do beyond launch day? It's time to keep this bad boy rolling until you get to your victory. And here are just a couple of things you guys want to keep in mind as it relates to launch and how you kind of keep the momentum going after the campaign. One, revisit your goals that you set out at the beginning. What happened on launch day and how does that help, or do you need to pivot for the campaign moving forward? The second thing is that you have a bunch of new supporters. You want to talk to them and keep that relationship alive. So think about ways that you're either doing that on social, or through ads, on your email list, ways to kind of activate and keep those new supporters involved. Third, going to keep the momentum going across. I mentioned this at the top, and this is kind of going across everything, but just making sure you're keeping the momentum going. People are excited about this moment. You want to hold on to that launch energy for as long as you can. So making sure that you're keeping up the energy in a sustainable way. It doesn't have to be as big as launch, but in a sustainable way so people continue to get comfortable with you. One of the things that you want to make sure that you are watching out for is like any ads content that is time bound. So that is like things like today we launched, or we're launching today. Anything that is time bound, you want to just make sure that you're doing a double check of all your content on ads and on social, well, not necessarily on social, but on ads to make sure that like 2 or 3 days after you're still not talking about you're launching today when your launch was actually 2 days before. You want to talk about calendaring. You want to make sure that you keep going this out week by week and over the month. What are your goals for the messages that you want to get out? Making sure that you're gaming that out and making sure that you're also leaving room for some responses there. And then finally, the thing we cannot stress enough is just have a postmortem. What did you learn from launch day? What worked? What flopped? What would you change? What wouldn't you change? And making sure that you're applying all of the ways that all the things that you learned from launch and all the things that were really great, and applying that to your campaign moving forward. And then lastly, just keep aiming higher. Like, that's our good go get them, is that now that you've launched the thing, like keep going. You got to keep it going. All right. Our favorite section.
Yes. We're going to end with some selected snafus. These are not necessarily snafus that have befallen us, but have befallen others. This is a real screenshot I took when Beto's campaign accidentally announced that he was running for president via an unsubscribe form. Apparently, I was trying to unsubscribe from Beto, and this is how I found out. So this is just an example of all of the little different tiny crevices and corners where your message lives. And if it gets set live early, the cat's out of the bag. I think I heard about this on Twitter like 15 minutes later. And then in terms of some real snafus, these have not personally happened to us, but we were just doing some brainstorming about what could happen. Some things that could happen, you gain a bunch of new supporters, but they don't get added to your email list, so they don't get your beautiful launch email. You build your ads at the last minute and they take hours to go live and you miss the window of opportunity. A broken link on your website prevents people from joining your list. So you got the biggest web traffic of your whole campaign and it didn't pay off because people couldn't, click a link. I've mentioned Twitter rejecting your video at 5 a.m. for being 3 seconds too long. Another very real one is that somebody doesn't have password access at 5 a.m. and you get a frantic text being like, how do I get into Instagram or Twitter or whatnot? Don't let that be you. Social-wise, this is a rare one, but your opponent could grab one of your social handles and begin tweeting as you, or just, blocking you from doing the things that you need to do. And then finally, versions of this, actually, this once happened to me, not at a launch, but at another time. But if you don't checklist properly, you may end up with emails that say, thanks so much for your support, first name friend. And that's just not somewhere you want to be. This doesn't have to be you if you prepare adequately.
Great.
Great. I think we have time for questions. I think just some of our biggest takeaways to review them are, as Avery said, build templates, schedule time for approvals. Ryan, what are some others that you wanted to drive home?
Make sure that you have clear goals. When you think about your ads budget, as related to your goals, just make sure that you are planning it in a way that ensures that you get the biggest bang for your buck, depending on what your goals are. So if you want to do like an awareness campaign where folks just really want to get the word out about your candidate, making sure that you're getting efficient CPM so that you're having as many impressions as possible. Or if you want to do an email campaign, a list building campaign, making sure that you're optimizing your campaign so you have really low CPAs. Or if you're doing a donate campaign, just making sure that your return on your ad spend is above 100%. So just making sure that there are ways that you're optimizing your campaign. And also starting the process early of the verification and ad setup, making sure that you have money. So yeah.
Great. And then just to reiterate our final point, and I do see a question which actually brings nuance to this. So we do frame campaigns usually as the biggest moment that you have to garner interest in your campaign. And actually, that's a really good segue into one of the questions we should probably answer first, which is from Jeff. We are planning a soft launch in September due to COVID disruptions and an official launch date at a later date for our membership program. How do you recommend that we frame this so that we can get to days one? Ryan and Avery, what do you think?
I think my first bite at the apple is that you probably want to, of the things that we've laid out here today, and you guys can check me if I'm wrong, but you maybe want to think about what is needed for a soft launch and what is needed for a hard launch. When I think about ads, I think about ads being the biggest microphone you have to announce the thing that you're doing. So if you're wanting to do a soft launch, maybe ads is not the way to do that. Or if you do decide to do ads, make sure you're doing it in a super, super targeted way so that you're not blowing it up. I would, I'd probably, so I think for me, I'd probably stay away from ads or do it in a very targeted way if I want to do a soft launch for the first one. And then on the second one, making sure the second launch for your actual launch, I'd probably include ads at that point. You guys have thoughts?
Go ahead, Janani.
Yeah, I think, breaking a campaign into two stages is sometimes that's actually part of the life cycle of an actual campaign itself. Even one that launches on day one with a run for Congress and whatnot often has, phases, often has relaunches. So I think some of it is also all about kind of finding a moment or finding an opportunity to retell the story of your campaign. So suppose that you began your campaign and then you won your primary. I think that's a really good moment at which to tell your followers and tell the world, wow, we won, and now we're moving to the next phase. Help us build the next phase or the next whatever. So a lot of it is sort of thinking about the full narrative through line and the milestones where you can do a reset or where you can believably tell people, we're now in a new chapter of the campaign or a new phase. So Jeff, I think I would look at the timeline of your campaign and where those moments are that you could plausibly say we're in the next phase or we're in the next chapter, or potentially we're about to have a presidential election on November 3rd. Depending on the results of that, that may be a really good reset point for a lot as well to be here's the next chapter. Avery, did you have any ideas for that?
No, I agree +1 to both of those. And I think you're talking about the reasoning for having multiple launches being COVID related, and that just underscores the importance of digital in a launch because all of these things that we're talking about, emails, advertising, social media, don't really have to change too much or become more important. So yeah, +1 to what both of you said as well.
Cool. Do we want to go back up to the top? I see some questions that folks posted a while ago. The first one being, how do you recommend getting in touch with a good Facebook and Twitter reps? We've had the worst luck. I will take a stab, but I would love to hear from both of you because I think about it from the ads perspective. cannot guarantee that you'll get a good rep, but I feel like the ways that we've gone about it for some of our clients, I think a number of different ways. I feel like the verification process is actually a really good way to get in touch, particularly for Twitter, actually, is a good way to get a hold of somebody. And on Facebook, if you are having the worst luck with finding like an actual person, sometimes they just have like limits in place in terms of budget. They just won't assign you a person. I would say get that answer question or use the help button, but use it like 3 or 4 days in advance, because sometimes they can take a while to get to an actual resolution. So I would say start out as early as possible with your questions for both of those platforms. I would say Twitter has a better response rate than Facebook, and making sure you just give yourself time to get to a resolution, because you will probably have some back and forth with them. Oh, Johnny or Avery. Avery, you might have the other answers on that.
No, I wish I had better news, but I agree with that. Yeah, like Ryan said, give yourself time. So they definitely don't respond in a few hours, but if you are thinking ahead and prepping all your questions and emailing them ahead of time, then we found that usually works. But John, and I know you talked a lot about talking with reps too on the organic side, if you want to jump in.
Right. Well, and that was actually where we were not actually in contact with the reps themselves, but our client was. And I think they just started really early, and they, were persistent. And I know, anonymous attendee, that you've also probably been very persistent and doing your best, but it just a lot of the time, the 5th email or the 10th email is the one that gets through. So these are really, really big behemoths of organizations. So it's too bad that they have so much power over our social media lives, but I think persistence is the number one that we found.
Awesome. We have a question from Britt. What are other places that you recommend for ads, since many are boycotting Facebook ads? That is a great question. The way that we typically think about platforms is really by goal. What platform can help you achieve that goal? Fortunately, there is no shortage of ad platforms out there that will help you achieve their goals. One thing that we like to do a lot is use programmatic ad platforms, DSPs. So that's partnering with someone like Centro or the Trade Desk or someone like that can really stretch across the internet, but have a bunch of different tactics and ways to help you reach your goals. So they have ways to help you, get email lists or get your email list building program going. Or I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for a fundraising campaign, but they could do that. I think their best usage is usually on the awareness or brand building side, when you want to really reach a lot of people at a really efficient rate. So I would do that. If you are thinking about doing some sort of list building, I would say, recommend partnering with someone like the Daily Kos or like dems.com, where you can kind of do that sort of list thing. It really depends on your goals, I would say, when we think about picking platforms for your campaign.
Brett, I saw you were asking what was the name again. Ryan, can you repeat the name?
Oh, the name of the platforms that I mentioned were Centro, CENTRO, the Trade Desk. Those are both programmatic platforms. And other platforms that I mentioned specifically around list building were Daily Kos, and then Dems.com, Democrats.com, I believe is what it is. And those are specific to list building. And there are a number of other platforms similar to that, but those are the ones that come top of mind for now. Okay.
All right. I can handle Stephanie's question about social handles. The fun thing about this question is that this is also something you can do proactively if you want to make life a little bit more difficult for your opponent. You can go and grab their handles. So for this, I don't think you need to go nuts. I think basically just any combination of first name, last name that could credibly lead people to believe that it's you. So obviously you're going to want to grab your first name and last name. You might want to grab, first name, last name for Congress, if that's you, first name, last name, year, last name, first name, just a few different permutations. And you may also want to throw a few misspellings in there. If there's a common misspelling of your name, you may want to grab that as well, just since people might search for that, find it, and then find a bot or something like tweeting as you. One thing we have found when, grabbing up the additional handles is Facebook or Twitter usually catch on if you are doing like 5 or 6 in a row, and they'll slam the brakes on you. So if you have a really good strategy is if you have a volunteer core, like a bunch of different people who are eager to help you out, if you can assign one to each of them, they can grab it and then nobody else can take it. And similarly, if you want to do it to your opponent, you can do it as well. You can try preemptively getting a hold of some of their social handles. Of course, they may go to Facebook or Twitter, and Facebook or Twitter might shut you down, but all's fair in politics and play, I guess.
We've got some dog barking going on in my house, but I can take Ethan's question. Said, what are some good ways to ensure that you test all the different little pieces to see all the nooks and crannies, as it were? I'll repeat templates again just to find them and make sure that you are filling them in. But on the testing side, I like to have multiple people look at something. So even if it's tied to an ad, say it's like a landing page that redirects to a donation page or that it redirects to an autoresponder, I'll have someone totally new, what we call checklist, that page. And we have like a whole list of checklist items that they're looking at. So they know that they need to not only look at the ad, but also click the link, read every piece of copy. If it asks you to sign up, they know they need to sign up, and then they need to look at the autoresponder. We ask people to actually make a donation and then refund them after. So I always try to enlist multiple people to go in and checklist each piece of each user flow, whether it be the website or an ad or any asks within an email. And then just having really detailed checklists is another thing. So our checklist, just somebody looking at an email, is probably around 50 little things that they have to look at every time. And you'll learn, like once you do one, then you'll kind of learn what you miss and keep adding to your checklist.
Right. One of the documents we're sharing is our own email checklist that we use. You'll see there's something like 50 to 70 items on it. And I think it's actually really good practice of training yourself to pay attention to every single minuscule bit of what, you're telling people, down to, the copy on your Act Blue page to, what's in the footer of your email. It really teaches you to kind of be very attentive to every single one of those little things. So Ethan, I guess the easiest answer is to send people through every single potential experience that a supporter might have, and that you want to be sure that you're looking at every word on the page, every place they might click, every place they might link, every action they could take.
I think this last question, I don't know if Ryan, if we have answers to this, but do you have any step-by-step guides or advice for setting up your ad accounts correctly? If we're talking something like Facebook or Google, they're like I said in the beginning, they're always changing. So if you're confused about it, you're not the only one. In the 3 years that I've worked with ads, it's totally different than it was a few months ago. So Facebook, I believe, has decent documentation on their website. But if you specifically need some help, I'm happy to help too, knowing that it's very hard. Ryan, anything to add to that?
No, that's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, well, it changes all of the time. So like, it's hard to get a step-by-step order in place. I would just say, generally speaking, start with the things that take the longest, which is usually the verification. And if you go the route of getting a credit line, that too. So start there, and then everything else you can probably mix and match. I don't know if you agree with that.
And I think on your note, if you manage multiple pages and you're trying to report on multiple things, just a clear naming convention is another thing that we take really seriously at DBT. All of our campaigns are named with this naming convention. All of our ad accounts are named with this naming convention. And it's a lot on the front end, but it saves you when you're doing that reporting and trying to differentiate between different campaigns or different clients or different accounts.
Great.
This last question is pretty good too. What are recommendations for priorities for a team of one? So we've been talking about how to launch a campaign with a full team, but that is a great question.
Yeah, I'm like thinking through it because I'm like, oh man, Britt, they really have you
Oh
working.
man, Britt. I mean, I think my instinct first off, Britt, would be one of the purposes of this presentation in our minds is to help people be realistic about what can be achieved. Because again, often campaigns launch with a lot of emotion and a lot of aspiration. And sometimes that can overreach the resources of what's available. So now that you've seen how much work and how many moving pieces there are, I think maybe the first step might simply to be realistic about what can be achieved by a team of one. There's a lot that you can do, but if somebody is coming to you asking you to launch, you know, $1 million in ads and to send free emails and, you know, to do this and this and that, it may help you to level set and to be like, look, or, you know, to even sit with everything that you've heard today and kind of be like, what can one person realistically achieve? I think the one place where being a team of one is really difficult is with the checklisting and the kind of the editing part. If you can find even one ally to kind of help you by editing your work or by, you know, following a user flow or whatnot, I think that would be helpful. But I think my very first step would just to be, what can I realistically do and do well? And I'll let the other two chime in on what they think.
I think one thing that, forget if it was Johnny or Ryan mentioned this at the beginning, but once you know your timeline and you know your capacity, then you're able to prioritize and deprioritize things. So something that we even do as a big team is saying, okay, if you're moving this date to this, then I'm not going to get you this. So if you don't have a website built by this date, then we're not going to be able to run on this platform. And just being very clear about what you're going to not be able to do if something arises. So I think just really prioritizing and deprioritizing things and just being overly communicative about that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to think, both of you guys said things that I was thinking about, but I'm like, if I were a team of, trying to put myself in your shoes, Britt, if I were a team of one, like how would I do it? I think, yeah, being realistic about what you can and cannot do in-house, and like what, at least from our presentation, like what is actually doable for you alone, but also like if there's an opportunity for you to ask for help and to outsource that help, I would definitely make a list of what you can and cannot do in-house and then outsource the rest of it. And that will help you prioritize what is actually possible. I would say if there's room for an outsourcing of any sort of help, then do that. And if there isn't, I would I think just like what Johnny and Avery were saying, just like making sure that you have a clear understanding of like what you can and cannot do for the campaign, for launch, or just managing digital generally.
One last thought on that is bigger is not always better. You do need a certain amount of person power to get things done, but you know, I've watched email chains where way too many people were chiming in and the message was getting lost and so on and so forth. So I think there are ways in which being a lone person can also be a strength in that it forces you to focus in and really refine and sharpen what's being done. So I think there are certainly some disadvantages to being on your own, but some advantages as well.
Awesome.
And looks like Beatrice has a question.
Oh yeah, last question. What kind of budget do I need to allocate for a council member campaign? Love this question. Okay, so the thing about digital ads is that it's usually, the way that I estimate is a number of different things, but one of the big factors that I think about estimating ad budget is based on the geography. So if this is a council member campaign that you want to geo-target to a small town, that's definitely, you know, that needs less budget than you need for a big city. So, you know, in the range of that, I really hate giving out numbers. In the range of that, I would say, you know, on the big city side, if you're thinking someplace big like Chicago or LA or something, like you could spend, you know, 5-6 figures if you want. But if you want to, you know, depending on how small it is, you probably can stay in the couple of thousand range if it's just a council member campaign. The other thing here I would say is like, what is the goal of the campaign? Are you just trying to, you know, get some awareness around it, or are you just trying to reach those council members specifically? And that can really help kind of decide like how much budget you allocate towards that sort of campaign.
Awesome. Ryan, if you go to the last slide, we have a URL for some resources. So if you go to that website, we have an email checklist, like Johnny said. We have a just general kind of campaign checklist with a bunch of items, just things to think about. We have a friendly how to set up a Google campaign from our partners at Google. And then I think it's okay if we grab this presentation after, and we'll add that up there as well. So go to that website. It's dobigthings.today/NN launch checklists. And I'll drop that in the chat as well.
I'm launching it on Mini right now.
Great.
All right. Well, if there are no more questions, we have 2 minutes to spare. We really thank you guys for sticking around and hanging out with us and learning a little bit more about campaigns and how they pop. If you have any questions, our information will also be on this page as well. If you want to reach out to any of us, we would be more than happy to answer any questions. Happy netrootsing, and hope to see you guys around really soon.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, y'all.